Today on Star Wars Fanatic, we're going to dig into the character of Gar Saxon and his super commando, Mandalorians. If you were first introduced to Mandalorians from the Mandalorian TV series, then you might have got a skewed view of what a Mandalorian is. You see, not all Mandalorians have this moral compass that they follow by, such as Din Djarin's. Yes, there is a basic Mandalorian creed called the Rezal Nari, but as you'll see with this character, not everyone adheres to it so closely. I know there are a lot of YouTube channels that have made videos about Gar Saxon, and there's also a Wikipedia page and the like. But I promise to add something a little bit more than what I've seen on all the other channels. So stick around to the end, see what I got in store for you. And let's get into the character of Gar Saxon. The story of Gar Saxon crosses two animated series and a comic book, the animated series being the Clone Wars and Rebels. During the Clone Wars, or even perhaps before the Clone Wars, Gar Saxon was part of a Mandalorian splinter group called the Death Watch. Death Watch was a terrorist organization of sorts that wanted to stick with the old Mandalorian traditions of pillaging and conquering of other worlds to bring them under the Mandalorian umbrella. But the part of Death Watch that Gar Saxon belonged to was that was led by Pre Vizsla, who was from Clan Vizsla, House Vizsla, and so on and so forth. Now, we didn't see Gar Saxon during this time, but it wasn't until Maul took over Death Watch by killing Pre Vizsla and taking the Darksaber that we saw Gar Saxon step in as one of Maul's top lieutenants. These Maul Mandalorians became known as Maul's Mandalorians, pretty much. And his Mandalorians were part of a bigger criminal organization called the Shadow Collective, which included the Pikes, the Black Sun Syndicate, and a couple others. But being part of that Shadow Collective, the Mandalorians were actually betraying their own Mandalorian people. Here's how. See, Maul devised this plan that he would have the Black Suns and the Pikes and a couple other organizations go into Mandalore and attack them. And he would use the Mandalorians side of the Shadow Collective to go in and save them. It was more of a pretend move to gain trust for the Death Watch Mandalorian. Well, it worked, and the Mandalorians were trusted by the regular Mandalorian society, which was led by pacifists at the time. And they needed these Mandalorians to protect them, so to speak, or at least they thought. And Maul and Gar Saxon and Pre Vizsla made them believe this. But once this deception was over, that's when Maul decided to take out Pre Vizsla, take the Darksaber, and become the leader of Mandalore himself in the shadows. And with Maul's new self-appointed authority, he brings in his own team of lieutenants and leaders and such as Prime Minister Almec, Rook Kast, and Gar Saxon. Gar Saxon being the head of the Mandalorian super commandos. But anybody could say that Gar Saxon was just following the Darksaber and who was in control of it, and they're the rightful leader of the Mandalorians, and so on and so forth. However, if that were true, Maul would not have had to lead from the shadows with Prime Minister Almec as the face of the Mandalorian government. Instead, Maul would have been out in the forefront. Gar Saxon would have been right behind him. Instead, you never see Gar Saxon or any of the other Shadow Collective Mandalorians telling Maul, look, you're the rightful leader, come out in the front. He doesn't. Instead, he goes along with Maul's plan to be a puppet master. You see, this is the first betrayal of the Mandalorian people by Gar Saxon, because he allowed an outsider to rule Mandalore. Now, it's not unnatural for an outsider to become a Mandalorian, but Maul had no intention of being a Mandalorian. He only wanted this spot to consolidate his power and then spread it throughout the galaxy. There was no intention of being a Mandalorian, and Gar Saxon would have known that, because Maul never took on the Rezal Nari. Gar Saxon allowed it to happen, even encouraged it. So this was a betrayal to his people and his own creed even. But this wasn't even his worst betrayal. So later on, Bo-Katan Kryze, who splintered off from the Death Watch because she didn't agree with Maul being the leader, she enlisted the help of Ahsoka Tano and some members of the 501st Legion to come down and take Mandalore back away from Maul and Maul's super commandos. Now, during this time, Maul's captured, Gar Saxon's captured. Gar Saxon actually killed Almec to keep him from spilling the beans about why Maul wanted Anakin Skywalker to be captured or killed. Now, this is the second betrayal of Gar Saxon of the Mandalorian people. Mandalorians are not supposed to care about outside influence. They're not supposed to care about galactic politics or Jedi dealings or anything like that, because they are autonomous. They're independent of the rest of the galaxy due to treaties that have been in place for 100 years. Instead, Gar Saxon helps Maul lure in a Jedi who he thinks is going to be Anakin Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi, but it ends up being Ahsoka Tano, in order to get Skywalker and kill Skywalker, robbing Palpatine of his next apprentice. Palpatine being the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Senate, Anakin Skywalker being a Jedi, both involving in both of those affairs, which Mandalorians are not supposed to do. Okay, so the Siege of Mandalore happens, Gar Saxon's captured, Rook Kast is captured, Almec's dead, Maul gets captured, then directly after that, Order 66. We don't know what happened to Gar Saxon between that time and about 15 to 16 years later. But during this time, we do see Gar Saxon again pop up. Only this time, he's an Imperial Viceroy or Governor of Mandalore, set in place by the Empire, by Palpatine himself even. Now, this is probably the worst betrayal that Gar Saxon has done against the Mandalorian people. While he is with the Shadow Collective, most of the time, they took care of the Mandalorian people, minus the splinter groups that were out to get them. They did make sure the well-being of the Mandalorian people was met and that they were generally safe and happy, because if they weren't, then they would overthrow these Death Watch Mandalorians and Maul would no longer have a legitimate claim to the throne. So now, Gar Saxon is by himself, acting alone as Viceroy of the Mandalorian people through the Empire. Yes, the Empire, the galactic government, which is not supposed to have control over the Mandalorian sector. The Mandalorian sector is supposed to be autonomous, like I mentioned before, but Gar Saxon allowed them to take control through him. Only this time, he's not making sure that the Mandalorian people's needs are being met. Instead, he's more of like a dictator. These are my people, these are what you're going to do what I say, and this is how it's going to be. He even used fear as a way of keeping his power. He was also involved in trying to get the Duchess up and running again. The Duchess was a weapon that would target Beskar armor on Mandalorians and cook them from the inside out. It would destroy anything wearing Beskar armor. And in another scene, Gar Saxon decides he wants to take over Clan Wren. He wants Sabine to hand over the Darksaber to him, so Sabine hands it to her mother hands it to Gar Saxon. Now this is paraphrasing, so please just remember it's just a shortened part of the story. But Gar Saxon decides he's going to make an example of Clan Wren and wipe all of them out. Sabine starts fighting Gar Saxon, she beats him, takes the Darksaber away, walks away from him. Gar Saxon was going to shoot Sabine in the back, and Ursa shoots Gar Saxon through the heart, killing him. Okay, so that's 3 times that Gar Saxon had betrayed the Mandalorian people. Not that that's uninteresting or anything, it isn't, it's very interesting. And do you know why it's interesting? Yes, this makes him a deep character, it makes him worth trying to investigate why his actions were the way they were and everything, but that's not what I'm focusing on here. I mean, yes, I did do a little bit of background on Gar Saxon and tell how he betrayed his Mandalorian people 3 times, but from what I'm seeing as a Star Wars fan, we still call Gar Saxon a Mandalorian, when in fact throughout his known life, from what we've seen, he's done nothing to prove he is a Mandalorian. He doesn't follow the Rezulnari. He doesn't have his people's best interest at heart. He's not following a Mandalore or a traditional one, with Maul being the one holding the Darksaber. That doesn't really mean he's a Mandalorian, because he never took a creed, never followed the Rezulnari, never wore the armor, anything like that. Then, later on, he follows the Empire and takes orders from them, not a Mandalore or leader of Mandalorians. He himself calls himself a leader of the Mandalorians, but he's not. He's not leading. He's ruling, and he's doing it through fear and through murderous tactics. But because he calls himself a Mandalorian, we, viewers and fans, call him a Mandalorian as well. Well, I think we should stop. He should not be called a Mandalorian. Bo-Katan had it right when she imprisoned him, and Rook Kast. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below if you think that Gar Saxon should continue to be called a Mandalorian because he wears the armor and he calls himself a Mandalorian, even though 3 times he betrayed his Mandalorian brothers and sisters. I'd really like to hear what you guys have to say about this. So drop a comment, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Hit the like button to show your love for the hard work I put into this video, and remember, this is the way, the only way.